I, Robert Gabriel Mugabe.
It is time to remove the illegal economic sanctions on Zimbabwe. After over 100 years of colonialism, apartheid, and brutal racist oppression under British rule, the people of Zimbabwe fought and won a national liberation war in 1980. The terms of the transition of power back to the indigenous people of Zimbabwe were laid out in the Lancaster House Agreement. On a question of land which was violently seized by the British colonizers, the United States and the UK agreed to buy back land from the white settlers. Unfortunately, they reneged.
We are an African people!
In 1998, white settlers, 5% of the population, owned 80% of the arable land in Zimbabwe. The indigenous people of Zimbabwe intensified their demand to reclaim their stolen land, and the Zimbabwean government implemented the land reform policy in 2000. In response, the UK and US and their allies imposed severe and legal economic sanctions. Sanctions were officially declared against Zimbabwe in 2001 after the enactment of SADC, the so-called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act. The act officially authorized the United States to use its veto power to make the multilateral lending agencies, IMF, World Bank, and African Development Bank, stifle President Mugabe's effort to get credit. This meant that not only were efforts to get new money necessary for development stifled, but efforts to restructure existing loans were also nipped in the bud. All of this was sparked by President Mugabe's having responded in 1999 to the people's demand to reclaim their stolen land. Economic sanctions are a weapon of war. Sanctions kill people. Like weapons of war, sanctions are usually used in excess against and among poor and black nations. Like weapons of war, sanctions are killing the poorest and most vulnerable people on the planet, children. Sanctions, like wars, have historically been used to attempt regime change. We have examples: Chile, Cuba, Iraq. Zimbabwe is no different. Since the cholera outbreak in Zimbabwe in 2009, over 67,000 people have been sickened and over 4,000 have died. Cholera is totally preventable. All you have to do to prevent cholera is have clean water. In Zimbabwe, sanctions have created critical shortages of supplies of clean water, water purification equipment, agricultural equipment, medications, credit, loans, and other necessities. Please recognize that the imposition of economic sanctions on a developing nation like Zimbabwe is not an alternative to war, but such imposition is war itself. Sanctions have also had adverse and downstream social and economic effects on the Zimbabwean economy's key sectors. Most of these effects have manifested themselves in shortages of foreign currency, resulting in the country accumulating external payment arrears and failing to import critical supplies. Multilateral financial institutions, IMF, World Bank, have imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe in the following ways: suspension of balance of payment support, suspension of technical assistance, suspension of voting and related rights to IMF, and declaration of ineligibility to access fund resources. Sanctions imposed by the United States, Britain, and their allies is estimated to have cost the Zimbabwe economy over $42 billion and estimated to have compressed the economy by over 40% in the past 13 years. Economies don't scream, people scream.
In the eyes of our people, the sanctions constitute a form of hostility and violence against them.
And what better way to make people scream to negatively impact their food, education, health, shelter, and safety? Zimbabwean sanctions are siege warfare and a weapon of mass destruction imposed illegally by the United States and their Western allies. President Obama can end the sanctions with the stroke of a pen. End the sanctions now.